during this ceasefire that has been established, the entirety of the Palestinian resistance, Hamas included, but all of the factions, they announced their own kind of committee for the establishment of this independent administration of the Gaza Strip. So when I look at this development and then see how the US and Israel are talking about the future of what's going to happen here, there seems to be major disagreements. We have the ongoing violations, and of course, the fact that Israel is not giving up its overall trajectory of a greater Israel. So I see this development as a limited victory, or maybe even a defeat for Israel, in the sense that you have the Palestinian resistance factions still vying for political administration of Gaza and perhaps Palestine proper.
There are several points you make which are important, but I would say the most important element of this really is the view in Israel, in the sense that as far as they're concerned, Israel is concerned, they don't give a damn about the Palestinians there or what they do, as long as, Hamas is out. But the important thing is that this was not a Hamas agreement. It was an agreement, a full agreement with the 14 resistance movements of Gaza, who all were in accord with the ceasefire and its terms, and also in accord in not agreeing to having, if you like, a technocratic, non-Palestinian government imposed on it. They want, and this is a really interesting thing that has come out, they wanted to have sovereignty. They wanted to have not be purely technocratic, because they wanted to have some form of sovereignty, Palestinian sovereignty. It goes all the way back to the non-aligned movement. And what Hamas has been saying over the years, I know people will not accept it, but I know this is the position that they regard themselves more as a national liberation movement, not as an Islamic movement, and as an anti-colonial movement. And so this is also deeply embedded. I mean, there will have to be compromises and whatever, because there will be all these Turks and Qataris and UAE people intervening in it to try and make it as technocratic and as anti-Hamas as possible. But, Gaza, I know it quite well. I mean, it's constitutionally Hamas. And resistance. I mean, there are a few of these elements, like, as I say, the Dhaiphong and so on. But these were really sort of criminal gangs more than, in any sense, had legitimacy amongst the public. And look what's happening in the West Bank, because the West Bank, the Israelis are saying, well, the problem is, the West Bank is becoming Hamas. What are we going to do now with that? Especially as the settlers seem to be completely out of control, cutting down olive trees, beating up Palestinians, setting fire to their vehicles, driving them off their land. 1,000 olive trees have been cut in this period since the start of, since the 7th of October.
How Israelis are thinking about this. We have Netanyahu saying that he will not, it looks like, when it comes to Turkey, I know the Trump administration has this idea that there will be these conglomeration of countries in the region that will take this over, Turkey being one of them. And Israel is already seems like it's torpedoing any notion that anybody but itself will be involved in what happens to Gaza. Do you see any possibility for a confrontation or a conflict between the U.S. and Israel over this part of this, horrific genocidal chapter in Palestinian history? Because I up until this point, even the Knesset vote in the West Bank, despite J.D. Vance's strong words, I think the only thing they did at the last visit to Israel was not to kiss the wall. Not much opposition, but words.
I think that's possible. I mean, the Israelis will really hate having Turks who are already there in Gaza. Obviously, they've been allowed in by Egypt, but they have Turks already in Gaza. And that is already creating considerable consternation in Israel, because they said the last thing they wanted was to have Turks as part of this force. And I think this is the one area where perhaps America can retain a little bit of leverage, is by bringing in the Turks or Turkish forces. The idea was originally that it was going to be the Indonesians, but of course the Indonesians backed off immediately and are not going to come in. So, and this disagreement about the composition of the force. I mean, this force was supposed to be, operating a month later after the ceasefire. They're miles away from agreeing who will be, how it'll be composed or what it'll do at the moment. I'm not sure they'll ever get agreement about it, and what will be its functions and what will be its composition. But who knows? The other point I just say is, and this will affect what's the future is. Netanyahu's popularity has risen quite sharply in the polls. That may surprise people outside, because they have seen, endless videos and others of protests against Netanyahu. But he and his party are ahead in the polls quite comfortably, and he's pretty smug about it. And he's going to arrange, he's going to sort of rearrange, if he can, the judicial process for his judgment, his court inquiry, in such a way that it sort of disappears. He's managed to put in a friendly face into Shin Bet, the security service, which will have a crucial element in the advice that is given to the judicial review. And then, then he's pretty well clear through till next year, 26. Earliest is sort of, I think, spring of 26. Maybe it will be later. But I think people should be under no illusion that what they call the far right is really mainstream now. And it has absolutely no intention of giving up power. And Netanyahu is fighting a war of attrition against the state of Israel and its attempt to judge him, and if found guilty, put him into prison. And I think, probably looks as if he's winning that fight too. Anyway, he seems very confident about it, very happy about it.
All that it took then, Alastair, was to accept the Trump-brokered ceasefire. Is that what explains this shift?
I think the shift of popularity was really, what someone summed up, an Israeli summed up in saying, "We're mourning, don't bother us." I mean, for them, as I said, it was all about 20 or 30, times more hostages, whether they were alive or not, or their dead remains. But, the whole focus of Israel is totally about the return of even the dead bodies, and the celebrations and the mournings and the speeches, and everything is focused on that. And the fact that, so many of those Palestinians came out of prison, their hostages came out in terrible condition.
Yeah.
Is just doesn't even have a mention in this process. So in a sense, Netanyahu's, playing the mourning, about, we're all in remembering, how ghastly 9/11, and, it's our duty to make sure this never, ever happens again. And, we've told them, we've killed at least 50 to 1 so that they understand. I mean, they are, and I've said that before, they are regarding it as the old expression, mowing the grass. Well, this has been a major mow of the grass as far as they're concerned, and now back to business as usual. But this means something deeper, and I was just going to say something about it, because it means that there's going to be no political settlement between Israel and its environment. I don't think that this is possible. And some years ago, I was working with people at that time to try and find if there was some language that was possible. Not to say sorry, because no one's going to say sorry exactly, but to acknowledge the pain that the other side have experienced. Rather like the Truth and Reconciliation in South Africa, but not in the same way, but just to be able for Palestinians to say something that acknowledged what, that there were Israelis that had been killed and had suffered. And at the same time, for Israelis, again, they would never take responsibility, but to say that they understood. And that could be the beginning of politics. But when you are, as you are now, with neither side being able to acknowledge that the other's, its history or its vision or its sense of direction, if you have that on both sides, there won't be any politics. You can't have any politics begin until, both will say of the other, look, I disagree with him. His view of history is totally distorted. I don't recognize it even. It's horrible. And I don't agree with their vision of the future either. But I do now accept that that is a legitimate position of their community. And only when both sides are able to sort of get to that point, and it takes time, I think, and to be able to accept what the other has gone through in whatever guarded language they use or however. But just to say that, I think, would help and make it possible to have a political solution. Because you're not going to get a political two-state solution by UN resolutions or anything like that. It's not going to happen, not possible. There are 800,000 settlers. And they really are nutty. I mean, they just are violent extremists. And they were all armed and trained by the IDF. And, the Israelis will never go, there's no possibility of them, clearing the West Bank for a two-state solution. And what Western power would provide the troops to go in and kill settlers in order to create a Palestinian state? That's what it's come to now. And, pious talk about two-state solution just ignores us. Unlike the people who say these things, I've been to these settlements and I've spoken. I know what they're like. They're nuts. They're really nuts. And, removing nearly 1 million of them, it's just not going to happen.
The situation in West Asia, of course, is really in flux right now. And I know that you've been paying attention to the broader changes happening worldwide. Maybe your concluding remarks on how you see the geopolitical, the military situation worldwide, the political situation worldwide taking shape as we are in this flux period in West Asia, the ceasefire, the constant threats of serious escalation in Gaza, Lebanon. Israel is still striking Iran. We know that war might be tabled rhetorically, so to speak, but it is still very much on the table in reality.
I said to you at the beginning we're in a sort of low intensity global conflict. And I think that's what I would I would say that we have both from Israel and from the United States, particularly in the United States, a policy of trying to dominate either rhetorically or financially or militarily across wide areas, to take control of the oil and gas supplies in the Middle East, to take control of Venezuelans' oil and gas, because the West is desperately in need of collateral, because it's overextended its credit. It's been pushing out credit liquidity like, no one's business. And it hasn't got collateral to it. It needs collateral, and it needs to reset the dollar. All this trouble we're seeing is intimately linked with America's debt problem and dollar problem. It wants to reestablish dollar primacy, if not hegemony, and it wishes to reset the financial basis of the world that will enable the United States to recover the position it had when it was a manufacturing state. And this is going to be very disturbing and create disorder across the globe, financial or military, and may set off or trigger wider conflict, particularly if there's an attempt to attack Iran. Iran, of course, behind this is also the American perception that the BRICS pose a fundamental threat to their economic primacy, and that Iran, of course, is a pivot in that process. But an attack on Iran to, if you like, to prevent China enjoying its oil and gas resources, an attack on Iran because it sits on the north-south corridors, the east-west corridors. All of this could well end up igniting many other problems across West Asia. I mean, serious conflicts and war, which we cannot foresee and are not foreseeable at this stage. But everyone is preparing for it. Everyone is preparing for the big war.
Yeah, I know we had news out of Iran that they are preparing, and talks about their missile systems very much intact. And there was that curious development. I don't know if you saw Benjamin Netanyahu telling Vladimir Putin that he doesn't want a war right now, and for him to relay that message to Iran.
Let me just quickly dive in on that, because I think the context was missing. It was sort of portrayed that Netanyahu was assuring Putin that he didn't want war with Iran. It wasn't that. Netanyahu was on the phone to Putin to tell him, don't give weapons to Iran, don't give weapons to Iran. And of course, he's sort of bolstering that argument by saying, anyway, we're not about to attack Iran. But the main thing was that he was putting great pressure on Russia not to give air defenses or other equipment to Iran, is my understanding.